Hi Rohit.
Hi, Badri.
Today we want to talk about the reserve deployment experience. Before that, can you introduce about
Sure.
yourself and about your till now the flying career?
Sure. My name is Rohit. I'm a product manager in IT software development company for last 20 years. Uh, for my flying, I've been flying for last 6 years and have about 350 hours of flying experience. I'm on my third wing, which is ENB, and with average 40 to 50 hours of flying, I find myself comfortable at ENB. And my flying experience involves doing small cross countries, typically in Himalayan regions, beer billing, and my home site in Kamshit.
Lovely. Um, in the career in the last few years, I heard sometime you said that you
Yeah.
had couple of incidents. All of us, including me, we have a perception about the how to deploy a reserve when the time comes. We always have in the mind some kind of a picture that if a time comes, this is what I want to do.
Yeah.
But whereas I don't think it is same when you throw it and when you compare that what you thought and what went. I don't think it is anywhere closer.
Very true.
Since you had two incidents, so I want you to explain a bit in detail
How it's happened, what actually went wrong.
Sure. This is very interesting. What you just described is exactly who I was at about 100 hours in my wing. Wanted to do my SIV with my ENA wing. So I did my SIV very early at 20, 30 hours of experience. And in that first SIV, the last exercise was to deploy the reserve. Now, I've been always careful about my reserve. I even asked the instructors to ensure that everything is packed. They did a good job of packing. And I was sure it's going to open up, right? So I came over the lake and I deployed. The reserve extended in the back, but it just dropped. It never opened.
it was just dangling. I
It
mean,
was
as
just
a
dangling. And I didn't know what happened because we have tried it to deploy, and every time it deployed fine. But that really got me into the reserve packing. I mean, I tried to figure out what went wrong, and it wasn't an easy thing to figure it out. What happened was it was a two-stage reserve, two-stage closure system. The first stage opens the lines, and second stage opens the wing, open the rest of the reserve. The loop on the second stage was slightly tighter. So when you freshly pack and you try to deploy, it works absolutely fine. But as the time goes, there's a bit more pressure applied on your reserve, and that loop gets tighter and tighter. So your lines get extended, but the reserve just hangs in on its own weight. That was like something that I figured out after long trial and errors. But that got me into thinking that how important is the reserve packing, and not just reserve packing, installing it in the right way, testing it often, the whole cycle that you need to follow to ensure the safety and the system is available to you when you need it. That really got me religious. Then I started practicing the regular throws, taking the reserve packing courses in our local club, and so on. With all that, it prepared me for the day that I really needed. So I think I'll talk about that now. Uh, I was on my second wing for the first time. I moved to ENB wing, and from being that bomb-proof ENA, which you can take it almost in all kinds of high wind condition, high thermic conditions, it would just take care of me. It wasn't easy for me to move quickly on ENB, and that too, I think that was mid to high ENB. My skills were still developing, my decisions were still maturing. So I happened to get myself in a situation where there was a knuckle. I was just leaving my home ridge. This is in Kamshet, Pavna. Behind the Pavna, there is a fort, Tikona, and after the fort, the second knuckle is where this incident took place. Now, if you happen to look on the map, it can get a bit confusing because the knuckles extend, and depending on whether you have slight east wind or slight component to it, the rotors could be on both sides of the knuckle. So it's confusing always, and you got to be cautious.
Just a slight
It's
angle of
almost
the
in
air.
the wind.
Yeah.
So just depending on the wind directions change, it could very well be rotor on
Yeah.
other side. Now, current me will never try to attack that knuckle so low. I'll always try to take it high or not even try it. But that's now me,
That's
right?
when that was about your experience was what? How many hours?
I was about 120 hours of experience at that time. I had done one SIV with my ENA wing at that time. So I find myself in a situation where there was a bit of a miscommunication on the radio, and I happened to reach on the wrong side of the ridge. Now I know it's the wrong side, but at that time I was testing whether this is the right side. So suddenly there was a surge, and I was actually climbing. So I thought, oh, maybe I'm on the correct side there. And after initial couple of seconds of surge, suddenly there was a one collapse on the right hand side. Fine, I knew how to handle the collapse. I immediately put my weight on the other side. But before I could even finish that, there was another huge collapse on the opposite side. That moment I knew this wasn't the regular condition that I knew. This wasn't a regular collapse that I have seen in SIV or I have dealt with in the past. And before I could figure out the plan, the entire wing dove suddenly 90 degrees on my right hand side, and I was left with the inertia on the same place. That caused my left hand side brake to be pulled so much when the wing came up, or when I swung under it, that side stalled.
Okay.
And now suddenly the wing was turning very hard. I was in a slight twisting situation with the wing that is facing down.
Yeah.
I knew, I had the awareness that I was on the knuckle, which is about 90 meters from the ground. The terrain is such that the point at which where I was flying, the terrain was much shallow. So I probably had 80, 90 meters is what I knew. At that moment, I knew that I'm not going to try to even recover from this situation. I'm going to first give myself a best chance that by stalling the wing, trying to put it in a backfly and giving myself more time, because with 80, 90 meters with spiral happening, diving and turning rapidly, all it will take is a couple of seconds for me to hit the ground. Yeah. So my course of action was to stop that motion first. So I stalled the wing. Unconsciously, I moved both the brakes in one hand, and with the other hand, I just deployed my reserve. Now, I didn't know whether the reserve will work or not. So my plan B was to go down with the backfly, which I have learned in SIV. So at least it will give me 5 to 6 meters of descent, which is more, but still better than going in a spiral down to the ground.
Yeah.
And luckily, the reserve did open. Now, if you look at the video, it's posted on YouTube. You can see just before I touch the ground, there's a shadow of round, big reserve opening on the head. Still, the velocity at which I was going down was very high, but there was a huge cactus. I just love the cactus now. I was saved by that cactus on that impact. And that taught me a lot. That taught me a lot that the most important part about our reserve system is not how well the reserve is packed. Of course, you need to ensure that your reserve is packed well, it's installed right, it's extracted right. But most important is to decision to deploy. You absolutely need to have a decision ready in your mind.
I have to ask you a couple of things here. Is a decision to deploy is how high is high enough and how low is too low?
Well, this is what I believe, and I have heard many experts saying that there is no height which is too low to deploy. If you could take your hand off, in a situation there are often the terrain might be so close, or you might be turning towards the terrain. At that time, your priorities might be the direction. But if that's not the case, if your direction is clear, no matter how low you are, deploy. Give yourself a chance. It can work in many different ways. One, even if a slight opening can reduce the shock impact, or the reserve getting stuck on the tree somewhere down can give you angular movement around the tree. There are so many ways you can be saved. So deploy when in doubt. That's one. But more importantly, be aware of at what height you are flying. What is your option? If you are at, let's say, trying to skim the thermal on the slope, ensure that you are ready to turn to a valley immediately if required. If you have a collapse on the mountain side, you may turn towards the mountain. Yeah. In that case, ensure that your weight is always shifted towards the valley. Yeah. So in case of a collapse, at least you'll start turning in the right direction. Yeah. So those are the things. But at the end of the day, if you're doing a cross country, you will be often reaching to the next knuckle, to the point where you're at that knuckle height, you are below the height of the safe reserve deployment. Yeah. So that's the decision what I'm talking about. You got to absolutely have a plan ready in the mind that I'm approaching this knuckle at this height. At least try to ensure that you have enough height that if things go wrong, you'll try to correct it minimally that you could. But if things are getting out of hand, you have a time to deploy. That means do not approach your knuckle very low.
Yeah.
Plan to approach, maybe don't take that high knuckle, take the lower knuckle. That will give you enough height to have this safety practice.
Yeah.
So that's the way I look at it now.
In doubt, always take the low knuckle.
In doubt, always take. It's easier sometimes to even catch the thermal at certain height rather
Yeah.
than going too close to it, right?
Yeah. So this is nice on the lower side. I want to ask you that, you know, when you have enough height and something has happened and throwing the reserve is right at very high, or what is a high enough that you don't have to throw, or you look for something else, other ways, and then you throw. So, or it's something has happened, then you're not able to correct it, you're coming down rapid, and then where is it a point
So
where
in short,
you make a decision?
you're asking, how do you decide to throw or when to throw, or you have done your SIVs, you know how to correct it, you know how to recover it.
Exactly.
How long you should try to recover it.
Exactly.
Versus at what point you should decide that just go and deploy. I mean, we all know the dead man zone. It's about 400 feet or 120 meters.
How do you decide this? I mean, you're not. I mean, one thing is for sure that you're not going to look at the meter and say that I'm at this height.
Absolutely.
So there is some way of practice that you have to do well in advance, not on the day of it's going to be like.
Correct. I guess you have to start looking at the height while your regular day-to-day flying, and start judging how does typical 100, 120 meters or 200 meters look like.
Yeah.
It's very easy. Often you'll be taking off in a thermic site, your standard house thermal. You'll top that house thermal at certain height. Then typically you will get 200 to 300 meter, let's say in that gaggle, the first gaggle. You at that time you know how 300 meters look like.
300 meters.
300 meters look like. But safety how do they come up with this number?
Yeah.
Typically it takes 3 seconds for reserve to open. Some reserves open faster, some slower, but take 3 seconds. And depending on your rate of descent, you could be in spiral. Spiral, you could achieve even 15 to 20 meters per second. So within 60 meters of something, you're going to hit the ground. Yeah. So you have about 3 seconds. That's how they calculate it. But as I said, no height is too low to deploy. So deploy. When in doubt, deploy. But let's say you are at a reasonable height, you are at the cloud base, and you really come across an inversion that really went out of your hand, and you have a situation at hand. You have a cravat and you're turning fast. At that time, your decision making is all dependent on how well and how regular you have done your SIVs. Because SIVs teach you about this decision making. There are certain situations at your level you should recognize that you will not be able to recover from that. I mean, at my level, I have done 3 SIVs now, and every instructor have ensured to explain me that if I'm in an auto rotation with cravat, and if I can't recover, let's say from 1 or 2 turns, there is a very less likely chance that I can recover any time further. So if you have a spin or a cravat and 2 rapid turns which continues to increase, in spite of you breaking the wing or doing the opposite wedge shift, things are not slowing down. Less likely that you can control the situation going ahead. In that case, just go ahead and deploy.
So you're trying to say that you never get into a less than 100 meters.
That's rule number 1.
It was a maximum.
Yeah.
And you're trying to say more than 1 turn. It's a time to think that it is
1 turn, 2 turn, depending on your height.
Okay.
But beyond 2 turns, especially in case of a spin, it gets completely out of hand.
We can call it like a thumb rules that was.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there are experts who can recover from much complicated situation. Yeah. These rules has to be, decided by individual pilot for their skill level, how much SIV or how much acro experience they have. Everyone has to have their own rules in place, and the only way to get these rules in place is SIV.
Cool. One simple question here.
Sure.
Since you've thrown it twice and had the experience, I want you to connect that and compare to what was it you perceived before throwing it first time to now.
Okay. So, the SIV was a failed experience, and everything was controlled. It wasn't a situation at hand. It was simulated, so it was all right. Before my real reserve throw, I used to always think that as long as I have figured out the steps, I have installed it properly, I have packed it properly, it's just a mechanical movement, pull and give a nice swing, it's going to open. But in real life, that's not how it works. At that time, there are a lot of things happening because you're in a flying mode. you have to first decide to go from the flying mode to the recovery mode, which is now throwing the reserve. So that decision is a one switchover. But after that, there is a moment in between when things are horribly bad, that for a moment you think about your loved ones, you think about that you might get hurt badly or you may not even make it. That could actually completely freeze you at that time.
Okay.
So it's very much required for you to push aside any of those thoughts and decide that you're going to give your best, whatever you have learned under training, give yourself a best shot to survive this. And that's when things mechanically starts happening. Your thought clarity becomes very straightforward at that time. Time slows down. And what you see in a video is like 4 seconds, but really if you see, the time I remember stretched to almost like 20-30 seconds. That's not really, but people say it's a cliche thing to say, but it actually really extends. So what I'm trying to tell you is that in that situation, you will find enough time as long as you could focus on the task at your hand. You will find that time. You will find that time to take the right decision, but just focus.
That's so beautiful explanation of you. So nice of you. Any last one simple message for the youngsters of our Indian paragliding community?
Well, take your reserves seriously. They would save your life one day. And then there's a bit of often ego that I find in some of the experienced pilot that I have never thrown, as if it's like a multi-year shield that you carry. I would rather be alive than to carry that shield.
So don't ever have in mind that let me not have that situation. I don't want to throw. Nothing like that.
Exactly.
If the time comes, be prepared. Just throw. Save yourself.
Save yourself.
Thank you so much. That
Thanks.
was a nice explanation. Thank you.
Thank you.